I had these printed up because it's a print-on-demand deal. That this is being distributed to Chinese around the world, really, not only in mainland China, but there's an organization that is doing several of my books and has done them in Chinese, and it's really wonderful to see a relationship with them. So they do it in what they call traditional and simplified, which is the equivalent of our Mandarin and Cantonese. And it's lovely to see that those are being used this way. Most of them, though, are so they're distributed in ways in which you never know. But it's a great relationship I've got with these people. But so I had them print up these two, but somebody requested them. I don't know who it was. I just thought one of you might know.
Sorry, I was talking to a gentleman ago. He was talking about AI translating. He was looking at translating. But it might have been.
Okay. Well, yeah, that's why I have it here. It was just my reminder. Did it work, or is it not going to work? Well, this particular talk, before I go any further, is going to be really requiring the visuals because of the nature of the material. And so it was going to be in Revelation chapter 22. So my proposal is, because there's no visual, that we postpone it until next week, and I just move the schedule accordingly. That'd be what I'd say. Which means, of course, we'll have an informal Q&A, which I always enjoy doing, and it's nice to do from time to time. And I never know where it's going to lead, and that's the fun about it. Actually, that's my specialty, is Q&A. I don't know why, but I like it a lot. I've actually done some whole conferences or seminars, and it was just a Q&A thing. It was kind of an interesting way it went. But David, you're back. Tell us, please, before we go further, about your time. I didn't expect to see you this morning.
You're very kind to ask.
You want? Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, very kind. You're very kind to ask. The Georgia Boy Choir went on a 3-week and a day concert tour of northern Germany and the Czech Republic and Austria. And it was really a marvelous time, and several of you were instrumental in helping support that effort, and I'm really grateful. Couple of reflections. 3 weeks in a day is too long. I think that the sweet spot is probably somewhere around 18 days. So we exceeded that by a little bit, and I just mean that because I had 32 boys, ages I think our youngest was 9, maybe 10, through 18 years old, plus some college age or just out of college age alumni of the boy choir who operated as singing chaperones. I really felt the presence of the Lord with us, which is always a remarkable thing, to think that you're on the other side of the world, but it's the same God who reigns supreme there as who reigns supreme here. In fact, we're closer to the uttermost parts of the earth than they are. And so it was really a remarkable time. And so I'm grateful for your prayers. I know several of you were praying for us and supported us throughout. So I could talk about it for a long time.
Give us one highlight, the thing that most comes to mind is...
Well, I think one artistic highlight and was the fact that we were able to sing in Stephansdom, which is St. Stephen's Cathedral in the city of Vienna, and that was a remarkable experience. We sang the morning mass there Sunday before last, and the place was absolutely packed, and the boys just really rose to the occasion, and I felt like sang particularly well, and then we talked to them about their reflections on it, and it was the significance of the importance of the church, the importance of singing the kind of music that they sang in a venue like that was not lost on them. But then I'll also tell you about another experience. We were in this. We thought we had one concert set up in a region of the Czech Republic, and for various reasons, that concert fell through. And so even while we were on the tour, we were kind of debating, do you go here? We've got hotel reservations, but we could cancel those and go there instead. We ended up keeping those reservations and found, through a contact that I have, a concert in a small Czech village, about 30 miles from České Budějovice. Know where that is. And so we were in this small but beautiful, beautiful church and in this village. And we had only been in, the concert was scheduled for a week at the most. And when it came time for the concert, the place was filled. The whole village came out.
Huh.
And the place was just absolutely packed. 90% of the music that we sang was sacred music. And the people were in tears and just so moved by it. And so I had a lady come up to me and say, how did you plan to come to our small village? And I said, I didn't plan it. God planned it for us to go there. And everybody on the trip thought that was one of the highlights. And I think it's because places like that we were, like Berlin, Hamburg, Hanover, Leipzig, Dresden, Prague, Vienna. Well, everybody goes to places like that. Who, organizations like ours, they are accustomed to great concerts and things from choirs all over the world, but not this little tiny village. And I don't know when the last time, an international traveling ensemble would have come to that village and performed, and they felt just so incredibly special. And I felt like that was a real moment of providence in the trip. So thank you all very much for your interest and your support.
That's good. It's an illustration of a lot of principles that we teach in our time together, isn't it? That you don't know what the really significant things in your day will be, and many times they're going to be unexpected. They won't be in your planner, and then you have to adapt to them. But they're actually, instead of interruptions as it appeared to be, it was really an invitation in your situation. And how can you quantify the impact, the eternal impact of a ministry? It may well be that in the economy of God, that may have been the most significant thing that you did in that. But how can one know? I've often talked about what we call hidden impact. Remember that idea? It means that most of your impact you're not going to know. You can't quantify it. But it's significant as being open to that, because there are no little people, no little places, and no little things. He who is righteous or faithful in a very small thing will also be faithful in much. And he who is unrighteous in a very little thing will also be unrighteous in much. As C.S. Lewis put it so well, good and evil both increase at compound interest. So that small acts of fidelity are amplified, and small acts of infidelity are also amplified. So there's a virtuous cycle of gradual moving higher, but also a vicious cycle of gradually succumbing to temptations that seem petty in the context, but actually it makes the next step downward more possible. So really, your attitude about those things matters a good deal, doesn't it? There's no little people, places, or things. And so with that in mind, then, whatever you do, do all to the glory of God, and you leave the outcome in his hands. So it's a principle. I mean, it seems to bear that out very well. So in a way, we should not be surprised, because this is the way God works in the economy of God. The most important things won't be in your planner. And that's a very great principle there. Well, as it turns out, that, as you know, we don't have the visuals. So when that occurs, we just open it up to some thoughts. One of the things I'll say before to kind of kick it off, though, excuse me, looking at our culture in general, because I'm a culture watcher, as you know, and one of the texts of scripture that I use is from a series I did on the decline of nations back in 2005. That seems a long time ago, 20 years ago. And I haven't really updated it. I don't want to because it'll be depressing. But there were various metrics whereby I think I did a comparison between the United States and Rome, Rome prior to its demise. And there are many parallels. I did 10 points of comparison. So it had to do with education and entertainment and government debt and so forth. It was depressing then. On every one of those metrics now, it's radically worse. I don't wring my hands in despair, but the scripture invites us to be brutally realistic and to recognize that as you see the day drawing near, expect that it's not going to get better, it's going to get worse as time goes by. Don't be surprised, because Jesus spoke of this in very clear terms, speaking about the times before his coming. And I think we're in those times. As you know, I have a list of, some of you have seen this, unprecedented evidences for the end times that I find to be significant. We are living in an exciting time, but the text that I find myself using a great deal is from Philippians chapter 2, verses 15 and 16, that you may prove yourselves blameless and innocent, children of God above reproach, in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation, among whom you appear as lights in the world, holding forth the word of life. And until in the day of Christ I may have cause to glory. And there I talk about the idea that your character, it starts with your character. Prove yourselves to be blameless and innocent, so that there's nothing no accusations will stick, and that you live clean in Corinth is the idea. Or how do you flourish? How do you survive in Babylon? So how do you flourish in Babylon rather than just surviving? Actually, you're called to flourish in the purposes of God. And this is a time for you were called for. You were chosen for such a time as this. So what do you do with what you have? So part of the thing is our character, but also understand your times. It's a crooked and perverse generation, not being unrealistic and looking at the nature of it, but also appearing as a light in the world. So we're agents of light. And so when we minister in this world, then we're agents of light, and I can't determine the outcome, but at least I can be an agent of the kingdom. And sometimes it feels like I'm a subversive mission, because I'm going contrary to the culture, and so I'm a cultural subversive in a way. We're going against the current. But as you heard me say many times, any dead fish can float downstream. You don't have to be alive to go with the flow. You got to be alive to go against the flow. And that's what we're called to do, because the biblical vision is very countercultural and very counterintuitive. But there's another text of scripture that came to my mind before we begin here, and there's actually two of them. The wicked strut about on every side when vileness is exalted among the sons of men. Isn't that an interesting statement? The wicked strut about on every side when vileness is exalted among the sons of men. Psalm 12, verse 8. And another one that's very similar is Ecclesiastes 8:11. Because the sentence against an evil deed is not executed quickly, therefore the hearts of the sons of men among them are given fully to do evil. That is to say, because we don't see a consequence, okay, we got away with that, let's try this one, and it just will never stop. And so I think those are characteristics of our time, because people aren't thinking anymore. The arguments that I now see against the faith, and people, as you know, suppose that they're being bold and courageous to bash Christianity. No, they're not. They're just going with the flow. It's a godless culture, and it's the only ideology, the only context or worldview where you can do that with presumption and think you're being prophetic, but actually you just fall in the culture. Because this is why it's something unique about Christianity that sets it apart from everything else. This is, by the way, why nobody swears in the name of Moses. Ah, Moses. Ah, Buddha. Ah, Confucius. Ah, Muhammad. They don't do it. Why does a Jew, and I've seen this, like I'm thinking about Woody Allen's films, there's one called Crimes and Misdemeanors, and they use the name of Jesus Christ as an imprecation or a curse word. Why? Because there's no power in any other name. So that's why it's a backward compliment, but there's a power in that name. That's no other name. And we're in a warfare where there's a spiritual warfare. The world, the flesh and the devil, as you know, as the scriptures describe it in Ephesians chapter 2. And those three battlefronts, as we know, against the world, we have to renew our minds, be vigilant about what we allow to go in there and what we chew on and think about. Against the flesh, we have to reckon ourselves to be dead to sin and alive to God. And against the devil and his angels, you have to resist. You have to submit to God and resist the devil. And so we have a battle, and every day you're in it, whether you like it or not. It's only a question of whether you're going to put on the armor or whether you're going to be vulnerable. But we live in a culture in which it's not neutral, nothing's neutral anymore. And at the end of the day, we are called to be agents of light in a dark world, in a time that's unprecedented. So in a way that's exciting in many ways, seeing, as I've liked to put it, we're not in the times of the signs. We're in there's the signs of the times and the times of the signs. I think we're in the latter. We're living in the times where we're seeing more things happening in front of our eyes, not less. But I find people's arguments against the reason are being diminished by a lot of things. Two of those things that diminish it are, for example, the mediaization, where the mediaized into imbecility. They just can't think. People can't think, and the social media. I use 4 words for this. I've talked to you about this before, but people pose, they preen, they posture, they position, they curate a false self, and disseminate it to a bunch of people they call friends that they don't even know, with whom they have no relationship. And yet there's people who've committed suicide because they've been hate bombed by people who are their so-called former friends who are not ever their friends. So here you have a relationless world, and I've noticed a collective process in our time of apathy, a growing collective apathy, a collective amnesia, because people don't remember history very well at all. And you've heard that phrase, if you don't remember the past, you're doomed to repeat it. And so people don't remember history at all. There's a collective apathy. There's a collective amnesia. They can't remember things. There's a collective anger. Like there's the idea that they have now somehow been violated, you see. So there's an anger. Victimization has become rife. And then there's also another one that I call collective autism. It's a phrase I've invented, I think, but which means that people are not capable of really responding well on a one-to-one basis. They're more comfortable if they're even in the same room going with this than they are with one another. So all these things have been amplified in our time, and these generations of culture carriers means that at the end of the day, people are now more interested in the digital world than they are in the analog world. Have less of apprehension for beauty in the world itself, and are more connected with AI and artificial kinds of worlds than they are with this real world. And this the so-called smartphone, where 6 technologies converged in 2007 to make it possible for us to have all things available at our fingertips, has changed us in not pleasant ways. And it's to change the dynamics of the world. I mention this because it's intriguing how the arguments that people now use are usually guilt by association and ad hominem. That's the arguments I hear against Christianity. Guilt by association, oh, you're one of those. As if that was an argument. Or name calling, ad hominem, calling them a name, you see. You're just a fundamentalist or something like that. Those aren't arguments. I find that people are not able to engage in argument and reason because they're not as good at really using evidence and because there's 2 sources of knowledge that we have. There's actually 3, but 2 are available to all. The two is rationalism and rationalism and empiricism. So your reason and your senses. So your evidence from your reason, and so the logic and so forth, and sensory input. And when reason and empirical evidence are being trumped by ideology, which is what's happening, whole transgender movement, things of that nature, when people can identify and say, I now am this. But what's the empirical basis for it? What's the reasonable basis? It's just what I choose to be. At that point, then, everything's up for grabs. You might as well be not just transgenderism, but also transspeciesism. I could identify as a frog, and who's to say I'm not? Strange choices. But my point is, once you're disconnected from reason and evidence, your feet are firmly planted in midair. You see, you're living in cloud cuckoo land, and ideology trumps reality. But on the other hand, you and I have access to a third way of knowing that actually gives us answers, because those two ways of knowing, reason and empiricism, by themselves are not adequate to provide answers to the four basic questions of life. Reason and evidence, because philosophy doesn't bring coherence, but actually just multiplies like a tree. How can we have answers to the four questions? The first four questions is, where did we come from? Who are we? Why are we here? Where are we going? Would you not say those are pretty basic questions? The first question, where'd you come from, is the question of meaning. If you don't have an answer for that, you don't know why there is any meaning. If all you have is impersonal plus time and chance, then there's no ultimate basis for anything, no relationship or anything. At the end of the day, you're just food for the worms when you die, and your life, as brief as it is an episode between two oblivions. You're here, boom, you're gone, and it's all gone. Oh, he'll be remembered by those who love him. What happens when they're dead? You see, so at the end, you'll be unknown. And so is that a basis for, so where do we come from? The second question is, who am I? Which is identity. And a third question is, and if the world defines you, then you're not going to have any security or significance or satisfaction. But there's another approach, the word can define you. And then the third question is, what? What's the third question? Why am I here? Purpose. And where do we get our purpose from? And the fourth one, where am I going? Hope. So the scriptures provide an answer for those four questions that the world does not provide. But I find more and more people, a lot of people that I know and love, haven't got an appetite for it, you see, and I can't make them have that appetite. We've been doing a series on Proverbs, and the whole thesis of Proverbs is that unless you have a heart for the subject, there's no point in exposing people to that kind of wisdom. So he tries to build wisdom into the student to receive it, to have a modality of receptivity and openness to the truth. But unless you're open to the truth, you see, the most important thing about you is not what happens to you, but what you are looking for and what do you seek. And if you're not open to the possibility there's more, then you're going to be confined and closed and constricted. So we live in a world in which I find that these qualities are continuing to increase. It becomes more and more counterculture for you to be a pilgrim in this fallen world, for you to be an agent of what's to come that's not seen and not visible. So I just share that with you because I think more and more about this as I see in relationships I have with people that I know and are close to me, that you realize once again, unless the Spirit of God breaks through, you see, it requires the Spirit of God to break through. At the same time, though, we still have a choice, and it doesn't defy the scriptures invite us to see that we're agents. We're not passive robots. So the most important thing about you is your responsiveness to what happens to you and what God's inviting you to do, because I think he's not left himself without witness. And so the most important thing about how do you respond to God's initiatives in your life? So those are just a few thoughts that came to my mind here in our time.
Yeah.
Yes.
I got you. Somebody else. I was going to get this in once. So I'm like, here. Ken, we've had a question hanging for the last couple weeks
Sure.
on Revelations. Why is it necessary that the devil must be bound for 1,000 years when he can just be thrown into the lake of fire?
Yes.
Very humility.
That's a good question in Revelation 20, because it's 6 times the word 1,000 years is used in Revelation 20. And my view is that that 1,000 years is specifically referring to that period in which Jesus himself, who was born to rule and reign on the throne of David from Jerusalem, the 12 tribes of Israel, as he told his disciples he would do. And so whether you take that seriously as a literal thing, or whether you take it as a spiritual thing that's actually not going to really happen, it's just a suggestion. So my own view is, and I know that this is not a primary thing, it's a secondary, there's sort of a hierarchy of doctrines, but your view of eschatology or on the end times is not central, but you have to take some position. And you'll either take the idea that those promises to Israel were spiritual and not really actually meant to be that way. And so what typically happens is that you require two methods of hermeneutics. Hermeneutics is your way of interpreting Scripture. The first way of hermeneutic method is literal. The second is spiritual. What I find consistent with people who deny that there's going to be an actual kingdom of 1,000 years from the throne of David, that 1,000 years is being described, is that they have to take the first Advent prophecies literally, because they were fulfilled literally, were they not? But the second Advent prophecies they take spiritually. But you consider like a text like Isaiah 53, which actually combines both the first and the second Advent. Why the shift in hermeneutics? If you're consistent, you'll take it in the same way, in a plain, normal fashion. And so, in my view, there's an inconsistency going on here. My view here is that there is, in fact, the end game is Israel in terms of God's purposes, and he's promised that to Israel, and he's not going to bait and switch and say, I know you thought it was actually the church, because that would be a bait and switch. No, those promises are going to be given to the church. If it's not that, well, what is the church? The church isn't the end game. It's the bride of Christ who's going to rule and reign with Messiah over Israel and over the world for that 1,000 years. We're his bride. That's why the marriage feast of the Lamb, the wedding feast, takes place before he comes in Revelation 19. Significant then that we will be ruling and reigning with him during that 1,000-year reign. And it'll be a time of perfect peace and harmony that Jesus will actually reign with a rod of iron over the throne of David. But still there will be people who will actually be born in the kingdom, because remember, after the sheep and the goats, all who go in their physical bodies into the kingdom, that 1,000-year reign, will be in their physical bodies. But they're going to have children, and their children will naturally need to either receive or reject Messiah. And so this is to illustrate, in my view, that when he's released, it's going to reveal the human heart, that even under the most ideal conditions, because it will be an ideal world in many ways, a reversal of the effects of the fall. Most of the curse effects are gone because of the dynamics of the kingdom, the fecundity and beauty and exquisite dynamics that will occur. It'll be beyond imagination in that way. And yet, it means that even under the best of circumstances, the heart of man is still what it is. And it's going to reveal that even in the most ideal situation, the human rebellion is not based on the conditions external, but it's an internal problem, because out of the heart of man proceed all these things, not external. And as a consequence, that my view then is that the Gog and Magog revealed there, which is not the same as the Gog and Magog of Ezekiel 38, by the way, that's another matter. But that he will be released for that season and allowed to gather up those people who, in fact, were against Messiah, but who whose evil was not allowed to be perpetrated because of the rod of iron which he reigns. And so ultimately it's to show that it's no matter what the conditions are, because you see the naive notion is if you get people in better situations, they'll be better people. Last time I checked, that's just not the case, you see. So the human heart, what happens, you see, in order to be a person who, if you're not a believer, then usually your view of anthropology is naive. What I mean by that is that you'll think people are basically good, because if you claim that people are not basically good, you got a problem. If you don't have the gospel, you can't admit the depths of depravity in the human condition. The gospel provides something that the secular, that the humanist does not have, and that is dignity as well as depravity. It's unique that not only are we separated from God and we're at enmity with Him, but yet we have dignity because of the fact that we're image bearers. And He demonstrated our dignity and our worth by purchasing us with His own blood. So we have great dignity. But at the same time, there's a need for the recognition that out of the heart of man can proceed all the evils, thoughts. If I read to you, for example, Mark chapter 7, which is the one I find myself my go-to passage for biblical anthropology. So you want to look at the human condition? Here, this is the one where I'll go, where he says, that which proceeds out of the man is what defiles him from within. This is Mark 7:21. Out of the heart of man proceed what? Evil thoughts, fornications, thefts, murders, adulteries. Oh, there's more. Deeds of coveting and wickedness, as well as deceit, sensuality, envy, pride, slander, foolishness. Are we all nailed?
Yeah.
All these things proceed from where? From within and defile the man. So Jesus is saying it's more radical. We need a heart transplant. Well, if you don't have the gospel, then you are not able to really come to full encounter with the human condition, because you don't have the grace. You see, you'd be in despair. You'd be so pessimistic and so cynical. And this is why existentialism became a kind of a cynical way, a leap of faith or hope in some short-term project in a context of ultimate absurdity. Because that was Camus and Sartre. I'm going to hold on to a project or an ideology that's short-term. I know it doesn't mean anything, but it's an absurd cosmos. So I'm going to go against that in bold, courageous defiance against that. But as T.S. Eliot put it, and I love this statement, he says, I would rather live as I do. I'd rather live as I do in fear and in daily terror of eternity than to believe that this was merely a child's game in which everyone gets equally worthless prizes in the end. See, the idea, it matters. Your ideology matters. And so the stakes are heaven and hell in eternity. I'm not a universalist. If I were a universalist, well, I wouldn't bother sharing the gospel, because why should I? So the idea here is, what's the human condition? If you're a humanist, you can't admit the condition is internal, that we need a heart transplant. And that's a dilemma. So those are some of my reasons for why that's the case. And I think that Christopher, you had a question.
You say that? Yeah.
Yes, I would rather live as I do in daily terror of eternity than to believe that this was merely a children's game in which everyone gets equally worthless prizes in the end. T.S. Eliot. Isn't that good? Yeah, but you see, the stakes are eternal, heaven and hell. And so the biblical the gospel gives us a broader, bigger vision. It's cosmic in scope. You see, it's not just a little life, but it has to do with your whole idea of a cosmic vision of a story that has 4 acts. And how many times have we talked about the 4 acts? About creation, and it started well. And Acts 1 was good. Act 2 falls upon it, and it's the fall. And the distortion of all that good because of sin And as a consequence is a separation between ourselves and God. Secondly, between ourselves and ourselves. Third, between ourselves and others. And fourth, between ourselves and nature. And that quote that I so often have used by Thomas Merton, we are not at peace with one another because we're not at peace with ourselves. And we're not at peace with ourselves because we're not at peace with God. The delightful summary of the whole condition. So the only solution is a right relationship with God. But that's how do you overcome that fourfold alienation? That's the work of the third act in redemption. And so that we are now near the ending of that third act, which if everything were to stop right now as it is, it would seem to be a tragedy. But no, we're living in a comedy. It doesn't look that way until the next act begins. And then you'll see that he'll make all things right. So I live with great hope in that eternal understanding of what God's to bring about. And that makes me think about something that Paul David Tripp put in a devotional, where he said in one devotional, he speaks of us as eternity amnesiacs. And by this he means we get so focused on the opportunities, responsibilities, needs, and desires of the here and now that we lose sight of what's to come. And I'll just read a couple because I think it's very, very helpful here. The fact is that you cannot make sense out of life unless you look at it from the vantage point of eternity. If all God's grace gives us is a little bit better here and now, if it doesn't really fix all that sin had broken, then perhaps we had believed in vain. If in Christ we've hope in this life only, we are of all people most to be pitied. There has to be more to God's plan than this world of sin, sickness, sorrow, and death. There has to be more than the temporary pleasures of this physical world. Yet there is more. And when you live like there's more to come, and here's the key, live like there's more to come, then you live in a radically different way. When you forget eternity, you tend to lose sight of what's important. And when you lose sight of what's truly important, you live for what's temporary, and your heart seeks for satisfaction where it can't be found. You look for satisfaction where it can't be found, leaves you spiritually empty and potentially hopeless. Meanwhile, you're dealing with all the difficulties of this fallen world with little hope that things will ever be different. Living as an eternity amnesiac just doesn't work. It leaves you either hoping that now will be the paradise it never will be. A lot of people live that way. And they can deceive themselves, go on forever, cling to that. Or hopeless that what is broken will ever be fixed. Only the biblical vision of the age to come transcends that hopelessness and despair that the world otherwise would provide or impose upon us. Yes, Parker?
Kip,
Yeah, my trilogy where I talk about these three ideas of loving God completely, loving ourselves correctly, and loving others compassionately. And so by that means I'm saying that if you're not defined by who God says you are, you're not going to be secure enough to serve anybody. What generates and empowers the other-centered love of the neighbor is God's love for us. To try to do it on our steam without a right relationship with Christ is to try to do God's work in our power, in our flesh, in our power. The reason why that seems so appealing is it's basically a humanism with a Christian veneer. And so at the end of the day, people feel good about themselves. And the reason why they're interested in that part is because that's visible and quantifiable. You can measure it, and people they don't want to live by faith, but by sight. And so I'm saying here that the only way in which I'm going to be secure enough to serve others is to actually allow God to define me. But that's not going to happen unless that's the centrality of Jesus. So it's, in my mind, it has to start with the vertical relationship, which empowers the horizontal. But to try to do the horizontal without a vertical connection with God is a terrible mistake. And frankly, it's just another form of humanism. So it seems good, but it's powerless at the end of the day, and it's just a social gospel. And I think that the reason why, what people really need to do is to wrestle with Jesus. And what am I going to do with him? So you know me. My whole approach here is to put something before them, usually the Gospel of John or Jesus in his own words, that will at least force them to think, who is this Jesus? And realize that you don't have an option. To ignore him is tantamount to rejecting him. That's an uncomfortable position to be in. See, people want to turn agnosticism into some kind of a virtue. It is not. It's really a failure to make a decision as to what you're going to do with this claim that Jesus has made on our lives. And it's a pretty strong claim. You can either accept it or reject it, but to ignore it is tantamount to refusing it, because if someone's offering you a gift and you ignore it, you're really tantamount to rejecting it. People don't want to be in that position, but I want them to understand that if this person has changed the world more than any other human being, you do well to at least have a first-hand exposure to what he taught. That's my approach. So my approach on that is usually intellectual pride. So I'm going to appeal to their pride and say, you owe it to yourself to make an intelligent decision, an informed decision as to whether you receive or reject. But to ignore is not an option. He didn't make it an option. So at the end of the day, I put you before Jesus, and it's you and Jesus. What will you do? There were not three thieves on the cross next to the two thieves. One who rejected and one who accepted. There was not a third one of indifference or agnosticism. There was only two options you have. He was flanked by the only options available: receive or reject. And here's the scary part: you can only reject so many times. It's a scary word, but reaches a point where you can harden your heart, and you can reach a point of no return. How many times can you say no to the gospel? It's a very dangerous game to play. So at the end of the day, God gives you opportunities more than you may know. People have been praying for you. People have been concerned for you, and so forth. And you've had opportunities, but you haven't really decided. So at least you owe it to yourself to make a first-hand understanding of, this is what he said. Hear what he said firsthand. Read the Gospel of John, or Jesus in his own words was written for that purpose. And then it brings you to that point where you have to choose. And that's where you have to be. So I think that's the way I can. But without the power of the indwelling relationship that he's offering us, you don't have the power to be other-centered. You see, the only way you're going to be other-centered is for your needs to have been met, not by people, places, or things, but or position or role performance. You have fundamental needs, and only Christ can meet them for security and significance and satisfaction. So without this spiritual life, the new power, it won't work. I just reread Mere Christianity. I've been kind of rereading some of C.S. Lewis's things I haven't seen in a while. It's good to revisit them because there's always such profundity in there. And I certainly, even now, as long ago as it was written, Mere Christianity still speaks in a very clear term about new men, about the new people he's called us to be. It's very, very clear. So, yeah. I have a list of C.S. Lewis statements of my favorite Lewisisms. And didn't I teach it here? I don't know. Did I ever get... That was Friday? I ought to do that here sometime.
Yes.
This is a collection of about 40 statements that I collected by C.S. Lewis, and it was done for my friend Barry Morrow. And when I saw him, we were talking about this yesterday, and I mentioned this in Shaped by Suffering. There's a picture of Barry and me on the Charwell River in Oxford when we were together on a trip. But I was prompted to see him, and I knew it would be my last time with him. And I had already collected an array of Lewisisms because I knew he was a lover of C.S. Lewis, and he'd written a book on heaven as well. So I collected these, and when I saw him for the last time, I read them out loud to him, and it would be good to take you through them. The one that grabbed him more than any other, though, because he couldn't speak by this time, it was, as I say, he was on death's door, and I knew that I'd never see him again. So we had a very meaningful connection. But his hand gripped me when I read this one. It was from Letters to an American Lady. Has this world been so kind to you that you should leave it with regret? There are better things ahead than any we leave behind. That's a profound statement, isn't it? That's why I like to put it this way. The least of heaven is better than the best of earth. And so that idea, the aspiration for home, a heart for home, and that's, to me, I'm now trying to convey that not only to other people, but to live that in my own life in what is otherwise an apparent tragedy. But we are living in a comedy, but it won't be revealed as such until the next act begins. And so we have to live by faith, not by sight. But we want to have a greater aspiration for home, and that's why I want people to become more world-weary and homesick. And again, another Lewisism is, it's not that those who are most heavenly minded will do no earthly good. Actually, the other way around. His argument is, and I think he's right, that the more heavenly minded you are, the more earthly good you will do, because you'll then treat the precious present for what it is, and live more fully in the opportunities of the now, knowing how brief, how ephemeral they are, but how they matter. This isn't a child's game in which everyone gets equally worthless toys. This is a world in which what you choose will matter, and it'll have eternal consequences in the lives of the people you touch and pray for. So it matters. Everything matters. And that's really how I summarize a whole facet of conformed to his image I call holistic spirituality. Every facet of life under the lordship of Christ. And the two words are everything matters. Again, going back to what I said before, no little people, places, or things. Yes.
I heard you say in a prior session, life is a rehearsal for play or get or something like that.
Yes.
Is that common?
It's Tozer. He talks about the days, he puts it this way, he's reflecting on Job 5, I think it is, and he says, the days of the years of our lives are few and swifter than a weaver's shuttle. And I love that metaphor, because a weaver's shuttle, as you know, if you ever seen someone at a loom, they'll shoot the shuttle across and then push down the loom. That's the next, and then they'll shoot it back across down the loom. And that's the best way you can describe, in Job describes it that way, fast forward. Without technology, a Weavers Shuttle is a way of going life and fast forward. Boom, day. See the idea, like a swifter than a Weavers Shuttle. So that's where he picks it up. That metaphor. Life is a brief and fevered rehearsal for a concert we cannot stay to give. Just when we've attained proficiency, we're forced to lay our instruments down. There's not enough time, enough opportunity to do all that the constitution of our natures tells us we're capable of doing. But then he says how refreshing it is to turn from our limitations to God who has none. You see? And in that, eternal years are in his heart. And so he invites us to that. So it's from the knowledge of the holy. Yeah, it's a powerful picture. And that is one of the great lines in the knowledge of the holy is, what comes into your mind when you think about God is the most important thing about you. So that ought to be a growing concept. And if it's not, something's missing. You haven't been reinforcing it. As you know, spiritual truth has a natural way of dissipating, diminishing, dissolving, doesn't it? Left alone, you unlearn spiritual truth more easily than you learn it. So for you to cultivate that, you need to continually be nourishing yourself with the daily bread of the manna of God's Word on a daily basis. And therefore you have to constantly be doing that, because otherwise it'll slip through your fingers. So having this eternal perspective is not automatic, is it? It has to be cultivated. It has to be developed. Otherwise, you'll go with the flow, and it's so easy to go with the flow and just let it go, and just everyone's going to be fine. Yeah. So it's a very different vision of life, but I see we're out of time.
I don't know about y'all, but if I was teaching a lesson in technology, turned it upside down, I'd be panicking. This guy just handles it with ease.